Okay, kids, we're going to talk about drugs today. So, you have a master's degree. Please tell me about your master's degree. I know it's in biology, but
Yes.
I want to know exactly what it's.
So it's I got a master's degree in molecular biology and a bachelor's in biochemistry and plant science. Yep.
So with plant science, you know, like we're talking like more human consumption type stuff, or
When it came to plant science, it was about growing.
just come a bit closer to the mic.
It was so you do papers to do with different horticultural techniques, and then you look at like plant anatomy as well as even the biochemistry of plants and also the relationship with humans as well. And then combining that with biochemistry, like the biochemistry was mainly focused on the human biochemical pathways and on a molecular level. So there's a lot of knowledge about all your systems and like on like how molecules interact with those systems on a molecular level.
Yeah, well, see, that's why I kind of wanted to talk to you about these things, because I know you know your weed, but do mushrooms come into that category or nah? Like
So-
magic mushrooms? Into what you've studied and whatnot.
No, I haven't really looked at mushrooms, psychedelic mushrooms anyway. The mushrooms that I've looked at are more of the ones that you see becoming more popular these days, like chaga and reishi and lion's mane and things. Like I've looked at those molecules in those mushrooms, but not really the psychedelic ones. But now that you mention it, I probably should.
Yeah, I mean it's kind of like a up and coming. I feel like it's an up and coming area in that sense because you look at like especially I think United States is a good example for what's going on in terms of these kind of progressions where we've legalized weed, everybody's smoking weed now, and now there are some states that are even legalizing mushrooms as well, which is kind of different. I mean, like there's videos of Mike Tyson going on a podcast high on magic mushrooms, so so that's obviously an interesting thing. And I feel like over here, to be honest, we're kind of light years away from that. I mean, we haven't even sorted weed out, and so we're not even going to talk about anything else. But in terms of that, like I feel like there's a lot given like last year's referendum, especially. I was just reading about that today. 50.7%. So, the margin was really really small, and we kind of really committed to it.
Yeah.
And it was funny because it was kind of like a Brexit type thing where a lot of people only started finding things out after the fact. It's like, oh, well, we voted against, but now that I think of it, maybe I wouldn't have, So it's kind of, I feel like we kind of really dropped the ball in terms of that. But like, why do you like to people that think weed is bad and should not be legalized? What would be a good counter argument?
Well, the fact that we, based on the Dunedin longitudinal studies and those, where they take a whole bunch of people and sort of look at their whole life. We've got a couple of those studies, and from those studies, we have sort of found that between 15 to 20% of adults between 15 and 45 use cannabis regularly in New Zealand. And so that statistic, I think, is probably on the lower end of the reality, because you're not actually going to find a lot of people who want to admit that they smoke weed.
Yeah, you don't really want to incriminate yourself, do you? Yeah,
especially like when it comes to the census and like however they're questioning it. So when it comes to that statistic, you're putting about 20%, 1 in 5 people in a box, and you're saying what they're doing is wrong. And you can go on the street and one in 5 are going to be smoking weed.
It's funny. Every time I hear about researchers like that, it's just like, 1 in 5 people, 1 in 10 people. Our research shows. I'm like, who do you ask?
Yeah, I know.
I've never been asked. No one statistic that I've ever heard of. I've ever been asked about, or anybody I know for that matter.
Yeah.
Who goes around asking, or is it just kind of like, you're on your, I don't know where you at, like university campus, and you just kind of stand there and be like, I'm going to ask 10 people and see how many of them actually respond. So I do kind of feel like a lot of this research is, it's very limited to say the least.
It is limited.
Yeah.
And that's where we look at the design behind the experiments and And that's where even, on the molecular level, and when you're dealing with an intricate human body, you can't really separate like the weed bit from the whole body. So you can do experiments on the cells, you can do experiments on mice, but like how good are mice as a model for a human, So, and then not only that, but when you look at the amount of people they ask, they could be asking 10, or they could be asking 200,000, and that's going to make a lot of difference in the statistic. And I think that's where people, with this whole science thing, it's like, no, you actually need to look at how it's done, and like, and the sort of, what are they called? Like restraints around them.
Yeah, now see, like in terms of that as well, like obviously because you have a bit of experience about, with academia, having a master's degree, so obviously put in a bit of work. Have you had to do much research of such nature where you'd kind of have to, use people as opposed to just kind of experiments?
No, so when you're dealing on a molecular level, you'll use cells.
Yep.
So
but was there any kind of quantitative research in that sense? Like, could you start, say, some research about weed by just simply starting say, okay, let's find out how many people smoke weed before we kind of narrow it down to the results of what the likely results of this experiment might have on the said people?
Okay.
Yeah. Is that something you would have kind of looked into or not?
No, so like we will get taught on like the ethics around designing these sorts of experiments.
They love ethics in universities.
But so like the clinical studies they're called, and for those you either have people, you can't just take them off the street and be like, you're a stoner and you're not, or whatever, and then put them in the same experiment. Like you're going to have to either have like a whole group of people who don't, and then you test the product on them, or you have people who say yes, they regularly smoke, and then you sort of have those groups separate. You can't really just sort of jam it all together. If you understand.
Yeah, no, I understand that. But say in terms of this research, I mean, I guess what it's trying to do is figure out the detrimental effects of, say, marijuana use on people, right? And I mean, what's the general consensus? Like, why is there so much pushback? Because like with such pushback, you'd almost expect like for there to be some sort of scientific fact behind it, saying, look, like actual weed use will mess you up.
Yeah.
Which is why we shouldn't legalize it. We should, stay away from it, etc. So, why do you think there's such a pushback? Well, is there such results out there?
Well, I remember when I was 10 years old, and I remember the teacher telling me, never smoke weed, you will die. And so I think it starts there, like, so this indoctrination of how it's bad, and obviously it's against the law and everything, and there's a stigma around like this sort of stoner who does nothing, and
yeah. But I mean,
lazy.
Like social sentiment aside, like like actually looking at the detrimental effects, because that's kind of what it comes down to when you're kind of going to put it up for referendum.
So so there's a few things. One is driving, that's a big factor. People don't want you to drive under the influence, and they believe, your impairment will actually like increase road risk and death or whatever. Then you've also got the schizophrenia possibility.
That is an interesting point. Yeah, see, give me a little bit more on that, because I have heard about this before, but I don't seem to be connecting too many dots. Like, what does it actually do? Is this like, can you actually become a schizophrenic from smoking too much weed? And
that depends on your genetics and other environmental factors. And so obviously weed interacts with your brain, and one of the parts that it interacts with is like this the thing that causes sort of these mental illnesses. I don't really like that word, but so when it comes to schizophrenia, if you have it in your family, they suggest that it's more likely that if you smoke weed or indulge in cannabis, then you're likely to trigger the onset of schizophrenia or schizophrenic-like tendencies. And you can kind of see this in long-term users with the paranoia. I think there's that's the kind of area that gets like triggered.
Okay, before we go any further, is there a way to potentially mitigate such things? So for example, to say, hey, look, there's a way to see if you're gonna, if you have potential for that, and say, look, if you feel like smoking weed, maybe just look into this first and see whether whether you're at risk or not.
Yeah.
Because I understand, obviously, like they all a lot of these laws and regulations are kind of like they're blanket laws. It's always going to be like, if 2 people out of 100 are risking, becoming schizophrenic, we're just going to ban it for everyone. Yeah.
Well, it's not just that. If you look at alcohol and your predisposition to becoming an alcoholic, like I'm pretty sure that's higher, but I can't say any statistic or anything. But when it comes to the schizophrenia, there is actually a gene that they have sort of understood that there is a certain type of the gene. It's called like a specific SNP, which is like a change in the nucleotide on the gene, that will tell you whether you're predisposition to actually trigger that schizophrenia.
So you can, like, if I really wanted to, I could actually go and find out.
Yes, but that gene, it's called like, so you can, we're coming into the phase where nutrigenomics and pharmacogenetics are going to come into play, and that's when they look at your genes and sort of can tell you what you need according to nutrients, according to like medicines or anything. And they can also, obviously with the BRCA2 gene in women, they can tell you whether you're at higher risk of getting breast cancer, etc. So this is all going to come into play, but it requires that you give your DNA to a company at the moment, which I don't know. Like it's pretty crazy. No,
especially at a time like this. Yeah, there's a lot of Yeah, it's a very gray area. Yeah. There's not a lot of people that are going to be willing to do that. Yeah. Especially given the kind of
mistrust and
the potential for misuse as well. Because absolutely. Without getting into too many like conspiracy theories, at the end of the day, there really is nothing stopping somebody from doing something. It's kind of like, it's been talked about in just about everything. Your iPhone could be tracking you the whole time. You think you've got privacy, but do you really?
Yeah. So I actually I did buy a DNA kit because I'm interested in learning about more about the sort of biohacking side of it, and because it does, if you let it, and if you analyze it yourself, and if you know what you're looking for, you can look for specific genes and what kind of variant you have and how this will affect, like, say, your vitamin D needs or anything like that. So I looked at the terms and conditions for the companies very, very intricately, and so I think that what it is legit. But if I come across a clone in like 100 years, or like in 50 years, I'm not gonna live 100 years, but and it's myself, I figured I'll just deal with it then, I'll deal with it then.
So with your, with what you're saying here, so essentially you're able to kind of study your own DNA. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you're like me and you
obviously have to know what you're doing as well.
You have to know what you're doing. Yeah. But there's companies that are doing that for you as well, and they're emerging more and more. And so there's ones that are specific to your fitness and your health. So the main focuses at the moment are the health and then the ancestry. And and there's lots of
predispositions for things.
As well as as I said, what kind of nutrients you might be lacking based on the genes, because you might have the gene, but it's how much you express a certain type of gene, and you can tell that by certain parts of the gene when you look at it and stuff like that, or variants, because sometimes people have different versions of a gene, and depending on what version you have, that protein might be expressed differently, or so a different amount, and that will cause you to then not have so much of a vitamin or something. It's quite complex. I'm trying to understand. I'm trying to explain it, but
I sort of get it. I mean, so essentially, there's a way for. I mean, it's for lack of a better word, would you say that it's somewhat like a mutation?
So they're different variants of the gene. I know variants is kind of a triggering word.
Omicron.
But
Omicron, where are you?
But yeah, that's the thing is that, obviously I've got lighter hair, you've got darker hair. This is a variant of like the hair gene, so or one, because with humans they're quite complex. Like with plants, when you study them, one gene will do this, or it's quite simple to understand how they all work in succession. But when it's with humans, there's like complex genes, so multiple genes will have an effect on one specific trait. Like, I don't even know what
eye color.
No, I think eye color is just the one, or it's pretty simple because that's from the Mendelian genetics. You get big B, little b, or little b, and then combine them and stuff. Yeah. So that one's a simple gene, but with height, like that's complex. That you can't tell someone's height based on one gene. It's complex. Lots of different.
I feel like there's a few dudes out there, like myself, that would be interested to address that.
Yeah.
There's a lot of there's a lot of discrimination based on height in our society. So I feel like some people would be all about that.
Yeah, totally. No. So those are all complex genes, and that requires a lot more effort. But what happens with genes as well is that people think, there's a gene for eye color, whatever. That's true, but then there are genes for, say, a protein that will turn on a gene. So
it's kind of like a sub-level of that.
Yeah, so these ones that turn on genes or regulate their expression are called transcription factors. And so they're little proteins that are sort of told to be created by whatever part of the cell. And then they'll go and latch onto a gene, and then on the promoter of the gene, and that latching on will be like, read this, make lots of this protein. So if you're not making that transcription factor, then you won't have that one turned on, or it won't be as expressed as much. And so that's when we get into epigenetics, because it's not actually the gene that's being affected, it's the transcription factor that will affect the transcription of that gene.
Okay, well, without going too deep, without going too deep into like the molecular makeup of people, so going back to weed, right?
Yes, sorry.
So like with the, if we're talking about the interaction between just weed and people, so to speak, and let's go straight for the fun stuff. Let's go for THC, because that's the stuff that makes you high. Because we're like, there's a lot of other benefits to it. The CBDs and stuff like that. You can address inflammation and things like that, and not necessarily get high from it.
Yeah.
But let's just look at it from the point of view that kind of that is viewed by the society as the bad factors of weed.
Yeah.
Right. So when we talk about going back to you mentioning driving while you're stoned, right?
Yeah.
Is there a way to kind of test that in a similar way that you would say a breath test for alcohol? I mean, I know there are there's ways to test for drugs, obviously, but is there a quick way to do that? Is there a way to kind of pull somebody up and say, hey, okay, let's have a look?
Well, that's what they're bringing in now, I think, in New Zealand, roadside testing.
How do you do that? I mean,
so you're looking at the metabolites of THC, in urine anyway. But
essentially, they'll pull you over for a piss test.
No, they don't pull you over for a piss test. They do it in your mouth.
Like a swab.
Yeah, I think so. I'm not actually sure. Can I look that up though, or is that too much?
No, that's all good. Have you got your phone nearby?
Because
Because I mean, it would make sense. Because I mean, you don't want to have anything so complex, or especially if you want to stick needles into people, that's not really going to go down well if you're pulling somebody up on the side of the road.
And it's not just with cannabis. Obviously, it stays in your system for a long time.
It does too. It's often one of those things that I find. I mean, I think it's somewhat stupid, you have a lot of, jobs and companies that are like, we have random drug testing and stuff, and they can test you on something, but at the time, you're like, well, I'm not feeling anything. He's like, oh, well, we found cannabis in your system.
Yeah.
You smoked 3 days ago. But, to the person who smoked 3 days ago, it's just like, that was 3 days ago.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
I'm good now. I can do whatever I want now.
Yeah.
These things don't affect you in that long term. So just because you know that I smoked, I mean, like you could have drunk a few days ago. What does it matter by now? Like,
well, and it's just that because like THC and other cannabinoids get stored in your fat cells. So like even if you haven't smoked in ages, and maybe you went to the gym or something, you'd actually probably excrete.
Like you get those people that that smell like weed when they schwitz, just because you smoke so much. But like in terms of maybe like concentration, for example, is that something that kind of mitigates that, or do you have as much of it in your system as when you're stoned, like you're actually physically stoned, versus 3 days later when it's still in your system, but you're not?
Definitely, I think the half-life is around 36 hours. So that means that half of the concentration of whatever you ingested is gone. So.
So technically they should be able to tell, no?
After 3 days.
Well, whatever. Like even if if us, you're smoking Saturday, you go back to work on Monday, and you get tested.
Yeah, of course they'll know. Oh, yeah.
Will they be able to tell the difference?
But between whether you
whether I did it this morning or whether I just did it in my free time?
Not with current testing methods. No.
Yeah. So what's that saying?
That is saying. It's not even. No, that's saying that they just look at you.
That's even worse. That's the worst shit you can think of. Like being pulled up by a cop and just to say, like, oh, he looked like he was high.
Yeah.
Damn. Some people actually just look high.
Apparently, they're devices that detect presence of THC in saliva. So this means the driver who smoked cannabis 6 hours earlier could have traces of THC, even though the person is no longer impaired. And that's the limitation with these tests. So even with the urine tests and things, they're testing for the metabolites, so not actually the compound itself. Okay,
well, in terms of, like quite often with smoking weed, you get, the whole cotton mouth thing, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, surely that's a side effect. I don't actually know. Do you know why that is? Like, what happens in your mouth? Like, why does it get so dry and everything?
I don't know why it gets so dry, but I do know that, so you have cannabinoid receptors everywhere in your body, like within every sort of tissue. Oh, shit, sorry. And so it also regulates, your endocannabinoid system is so intricate and influences the homeostasis of a lot of different effects, such as your appetite and
now we know about appetite.
And so
munchies are bad.
And your taste, your sensory, everything. So for me, that's I can just assume that that's another pathway where
so I mean,
the salivary.
The thing I'm thinking of, like, is it something that they kind of can test potentially, like if it's a way, like the whole swab test, you could swab and obviously
it's
you
too dry, you're definitely stoned.
but like maybe there is something in there that causes that and therefore can be tested.
True, yeah, possibly. The other reason why I just give no credit to these testing systems at all is because I know multiple people who, with whatever method, have gotten away with, I've heard of one person who smoked, as she took I think you can buy them from certain stores, these kits that you just drink. So she had her test. She smoked, she drank the thing, and then she smoked before she did the test, and she passed the test.
Sure, okay, so they're actually that effective.
Yeah.
Because the thing is, I always wondered about that. I used to read a lot of Australian motorcycle, chopper mags and everything like that. And, obviously, I feel like they kind of realized that their target demographic might be into that kind of thing. And there was a lot of advertisements for those kind of things. And I always thought it was just like, okay. And they're like, if you get piss tested, here you go, like, we got your back. And I was wondering, like, if that actually works and how it works too, because for some reason I thought maybe it's like a pill you drop into the cup or something like that, and then it kind of like purifies everything, just like,
Well, I know that when you go for a test, they look at the dilution, so you can't have like drunk like 5 liters of water, because they'll be like, no, you've drank too much water, because they can tell that from like when you pee. But
but what if I was thirsty?
Yeah,
that's a bit like like the fuck's it, like any of your business how much water I've drank.
Well, apparently they think it's their business, but and I guess if you're driving equipment and you're doing something that is already a safety hazard, then perhaps that it's sort of legit. But for your average job, I don't think that you should really be doing them. But anyway, so yeah, you can take these kits. I looked and I saw that what's it, activated charcoal.
Mm-hmm.
So that binds to compounds and sort of is a non-detoxificant. Yeah, so it will detox you and things like that. But I think these are orange flavored and stuff like that.
Actually, that brings me to a good little point. It's not something that I've seen very often here in New Zealand, but I do know that a lot of Russians back in the motherland take activated charcoal before going on benders, so that's kind of like a way, I guess it's a way to mitigate these things. And I found that quite interesting, because, like, as far as I knew, most people always took, like as a kid, people usually took activated charcoal for like, indigestion or whatever, to kind of detox that. But then, they're like, we're probably going to get pretty hammered tonight. I'm going to take some activated charcoal, and like,
but I think that's also so that things have more of an effect, because if you clear out, then you'll...
So the alcohol would hit harder.
Yeah, so everything would hit harder, because like you're getting rid of a whole bunch of chemicals that could be blocking certain receptors that you'd want your drugs or whatever to bind to give an effect. So if you clear it all out beforehand, then you're going to feel it more.
Wow.
It's the same as like drinking on an empty stomach or anything like that. You're gonna
no, but it's quite interesting. You kind of just like uncovered a little like life hack.
Cheaper.
No. Well, okay. Well, from that point of view, like, okay, so we've got, like, let's look at United States. Like, it's pretty much legal there. Canada, there's plenty of places in the world where, weed is legal now.
Yeah.
You can, like, you got all these rappers promoting it. They go, everybody's got their own, Cypress Hill, OG, insane. And, given things the way they are, like, I mean, it doesn't seem like there's any negative effect, not like on society at large. Like, I mean, definitely nothing noticeable enough for somebody to come out and say, hey, you know what, you shouldn't have done that. There's no kind of second, like a follow-up attempt at prohibition, kind of like, I mean, they did that with alcohol back in the day, they try to go dry. I don't see that with weed. It just seems to kind of flow. So in terms of that, do you think that, like if New Zealand, for example, let's take New Zealand, if New Zealand was to legalize weed, do you think that there would be, too many issues around that? Like from a societal point of view?
That's difficult, because there's a few different things at play. So obviously we've got the current market, which is obviously the black market. And who is that run by? That's run by like growers, dealers and sellers who are all, under the law or around the law.
Outside the law, outlaws,
And so with that, when it comes on top of the board or, legitimized, what happens to those people? So in my opinion, if I was one of those people, I would have voted no on the referendum, because if I'm
a lot of people did. I mean, I'm not gonna kind of we don't do dry snitching on the show, but you know, like I know guys. I know a few people, and you know, like, and I know for a fact that like they've admitted to it. They said, I voted against it. Like, this is my business. The only thing that, you know, they kind of came to mind, and I'm like, okay, it kind of makes sense, but on the counter argument, it's actually something that I've heard elsewhere, but so when they took, for example, prohibition in the States, you know, like during the prohibition, obviously, you know, they had like the golden age of organized crime, you know, the American mafia and everything. They said that a lot of the illegal operations essentially ended up being some of the biggest legal businesses down the line. So this is kind of like the one thing that came to mind for me. It's just like, well, you know, like you could have actually done something with it, and you know, you could have legitimized yourself. Like you don't need to be an outlaw anymore. You know, like you could be a legitimate businessman.
But you know, when it comes to that, like, you know, I don't like being told what to do at the best of times. And when you've had this business for so long, and then people are asking you to pay certain fees for regulation, for production, and making you go through all these hoops, when you can just sell it and people buy it, like, you know, and then they can set the price as well, like, you know, on their terms. And
but I mean, that's, you know, like like black market still is a market. You know, it still has its economics. So it's hard to sell a 50 bag for more than a 50 bag.
But I mean, the different quality that you're gonna get for the same amount is pretty crazy. I've had some. I mean, you know. But the other side that we look at in New Zealand is this emerging medicinal cannabis scene. And, you know, this is kind of, these are the other people who would have voted no, because medicinal cannabis is different from legalizing cannabis.
Well, I've actually noticed that essentially it's, you know, it created its own niche, and in that niche, essentially, it's become very profitable because you know, you're the few people, you run the show. So you're not, you know, it's a lot harder for anybody to enter that area.
Yes, absolutely.
You know, especially with a substance like cannabis, you know, you don't just show up.
Even with a master's degree in plant molecular biology, I've applied for multiple jobs in the medicinal cannabis industry, and none of them are interested. But so I might be a little bit biased when I come to my opinions on this, but when you're creating this sort of elitist separation, with this medicinal cannabis scene, what they're sort of trying to say to New Zealand is like, oh, look at us, we're helping New Zealanders, we're going to provide you with medicine, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, okay, so the same oil that you could make for $10 at your house, you're going to sell for $300, and you're going to make people have a thing from a doctor saying they can buy it. And
I mean, and a doctor's got to get paid too. So there's multiple layers. You know, like there's the doctor, then the doctor sends you to a specialist, and then the specialist gives you a prescription, and then you finally get to these guys. They set the price. The government will obviously tax the Jesus out of them as well.
They do.
But at the same time, it's kind of like, well, you know, we own the market. We set it how we want it.
Exactly. And so, and when I look further into these companies, what I have found is that a lot of the big ones, actually, they say that they're New Zealand owned, but what they do is they have a couple of New Zealanders in the front facing, and actually their offices are back in America, like with their investors and stuff. And my arcade's for New Zealand. And I know from working in like a corporate environment for a time that there's no product in New Zealand that is able to just have a New Zealand market. You know, it has to scale worldwide to really be successful, and that's no different to this industry. They're not doing it for New Zealanders. They're doing it to scale, to go overseas and to sell the product because it's New Zealand. You know, we've got this beautiful clean green image at the moment.
Pure clean green.
Yeah. And so they just monetize that and like get on and market the shit out of that, and then just run with it. And you know, they're providing New Zealanders with jobs, but also like, what about these green fairies? What about these, you know, these people who do it legitimately because they want to help people, New Zealanders, help their Kiwis, help their friends and stuff. You know, you're cutting them out because all of these taxes on the all these startup costs, all these GMP standards you have to
Oh,
fly
there'll be a ton of licenses and everything. So essentially, like, it's every incentive not to do it. Like, they're trying to put you off as much as they can.
And just have these corporations that will contribute to the New Zealand economy in some way. I don't think it's that substantial to really save New Zealand or anything.
It's funny you say that too, because this is where, like me, having a more kind of economics-based background, I really thought that there was a big opportunity that we missed out on, because we're perfect for that, and in fact, it's a great opportunity because we haven't got too many others. We don't make stuff here. Yeah. We don't manufacture stuff. We don't really have any like raw materials or anything. All we really have is agriculture, which is, it's either some sort of like fruits, vegetables, or meat. Now, with meat, we're already having problems. We are carbon footprint, and, they're taxing farmers. The farmers, on the other hand, are protesting. Yeah. And, so like this would actually have been a great opportunity for us, because we have the land for that. Yeah. We have the economy,
the environmental conditions, and perfect for cannabis growing. But with people would say that we are doing it, but we're doing it in an elitist way that's very exclusive.
And it's just when you do it like that as well, like, it's not enough. It just isn't. Like, if you really want to make a meaningful impact on the economy, you need to make it to the point where it's actually accessible to everyone, where you could find some mainstream consumers as well. It's not some specialized thing where you just about have to be dying to access that, which is, in a lot of cases is what it is. They don't just give it to anyone. You don't just show up and say, hey, I'm not feeling well. I'm sick. I'm pains, whatever, quite often they won't give you that. They'll give you all sorts of other crap. They'll give you the stuff that's actually a whole lot worse for you. They'll give you opiates, etc., but they won't give you that. So I felt like, in this sense, we really kind of missed out on an opportunity. And the other thing is, if you're gonna go with weed, you're gonna go with weed, hemp, etc., like there's other things that you can do with that. Like, this isn't just about growing weed and smoking it. There's many things you can do. But that also being said, we could have had ourselves a pretty good export.
Well, I mean, we are going to. It's just going to be the medicinal form. It's not going to be. It's going to be the GMP standard medicinal from New Zealand extract. It's not going to be the. What I'm disappointed in is, like, because smoking isn't a way for health, so they make oils and they make, these tinctures and things. What I'd really have loved to see is the different strains that we could be breeding, and the different actual cannabis as a smoking product. Like, I know that's a bit, or even offering the flower in its raw form for you to do with what you will, but to have that, like, understanding of, like, the different cannabinoid makeup, the different terpene makeup.
Exactly, yeah. So, like, in the past, when somebody buys weed, they just go and buy weed. Most of the time, they won't know it. There might be a couple of, connoisseurs that go out and buy, like, like AK-47, all of that kind of stuff. But, that being said, most of the time, people don't know what it is. They don't know what it may have been sprayed with, etc. Because that's one of the other things is, there has been a problem in the past where, it's being sprayed by meth, essentially. So, in that sense, also, not all weed is the same. It has I'd say rather radically different effects from the different strains. And that's just narrowing it down to, say, like sativa and indica, we're not even going into, like, the, the more complex subcategories of it.
Well, the whole sativa indica thing will get a few scientists rowling as well, because like that kind of nomenclature, or like the classification, is very arbitrary. Like when you look at the chemical profiles, you can see some indica strains with high THC, high CBD, but then you can also see the same in what they'd call sativa strains.
The thing is, like, you know, I mean, my knowledge on the technicalities of it is relatively limited, but from what I understand is sativa and indica, they originated from different climates, with indica being the colder, harsher climates from what I know, and sativa being from the more softer, warmer climates.
Well, with indica, it actually originated in there's a lot of discussion. There always is when you're discussing taxonomy and the past and where they try and put the dates in. But indica is from India and from.
Interesting. I should have kind of you should have got it from the name, but
and then they say that sativa originally was the name for hemp. So it was for the non-psychoactive, and indica was the psychoactive.
Okay.
And somehow we've changed that so that sativa is supposedly high THC, low CBD, and indica is high THC, high CBD. They try to present it as like, okay, sativa gets you high, indica gets you kind of drowsy type feeling. Yeah. So those kinds of names are kind of obsolete because you're more interested in the chemotaxic profile or the chemotaxy, which just means the chemical profile. So that means the level of THC and CBD primarily, but then you've got like 100 other cannabinoids that you can look at if you really want to. And originally, cannabis was apparently, they first think it was localized to Tibet, like to Tibetan Ridge.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's pretty cool. I just like that. Sorry. And on the ridges.
so exotic,
No, because it was on the ridges, and so what happens is, because of it being where it was on the ridge, the sunlight shines really harshly, and the cannabinoids are actually produced by the plant to mitigate some of the intensity of the UV. And so that's why, like, at the top of the plant, you're going to find all the flowers are going to be like higher in cannabinoids because they're closest to the sun, which I find kind of fascinating.
Yeah, no, I mean, I suppose, just like anything else, you adapt to your environment.
Yeah.
Okay, well, from the point of view of, of consumption, right?
Yes.
From the point of view of consumption, there's different ways to do this, and, obviously the kind of, I suppose the mainstream way is to smoke it. And then there's the edibles, right? Now, from that point of view, like let's compare smoking weed to smoking cigarettes, right? And I mean, I understand that, with cigarettes and all that, there's nicotine, etc. But just from the fact that you're inhaling smoke of something, is it the same thing?
There is a risk to it. There will be, you're going to have a higher risk of developing some sort of lung-associated disease from smoking. But that's because when you smoke, you're inhaling sort of, a burnt material, which will have, what is it, like damaging chemicals on it.
What do you call this stuff? I feel like it has a name.
Just from combusting the chemicals, so like from the combustion, then you're producing these chemicals which can possibly have a negative effect.
Yeah. I mean, like I can obviously see why. I mean, like if you ever looked at a like a pipe, for example, from weed.
Pretty dirty, eh?
Yeah. So I mean, you kind of imagine, like, is this the kind of stuff that goes into your lungs? Which, well, it probably would.
Yeah, 100%. And like some of the sort of symptoms from long-term smokers are like increased, like saliva and that kind of mucus.
Yeah. So like sinuses and whatnot.
Yes. So that's one thing that you're gonna.
So in terms of that, like, if you look at it, you're probably, if you were to consume, you would be better off consuming it as some sort of an edible or an oil.
Yeah, well, that is one way. With it, just when you're dealing with different ways of consumption, obviously, if you smoke it, you get a high within 2 minutes.
Yeah.
And then with eating, it's going to be a longer time. and it's also going to...
Well, because with eating, it has to kind of like metabolize, doesn't it?
Yeah, so
it's kind of like drinking a coffee. You don't just kind of get it hit straight away. It's going to take a few minutes.
So like you have first, you have the primary digestion, and then you have like a way to bypass that as well. So when you know, those tinctures and stuff that you're meant to hold in your mouth, so those are some of the way that these cannabis drops or whatever. I think Sativex is one of the like medicinal names for THC, and you hold it in there because you're bypassing the digestive system, because when you digest things, you're actually going to lose potency just based on how it breaks down.
No, just like it's kind of like smashing it out. It's, you know, like it's I suppose it's like with a lot of different substances. This is why they inject stuff into you as opposed to giving you pills. And, you know, like it kind of goes straight into the bloodstream type thing.
But one thing about edibles that I found really, really cool is that you have cannabinoid receptors in your gut, you know, so, and your gut is connected to your brain with a gut-brain connection. And so when you're actually digesting those and you're going into your gut, those cannabinoid receptors, I feel like those are stimulated more so than you've ever had before with edibles. And there's so many positive benefits to that.
What does it feel like? Does it actually feel different, you know, how you can perceive the effects? Or
no, so you know, so when you eat edibles, some people say, oh my God, it was crazy. It's not just because there's like a higher amount of THC than you smoke it. It's because there's some, as I said, there's cannabinoid receptors in your gut. And
is it like, does it just kind of like make it stronger?
Yeah, and not only that, but there's so many benefits to your gut receiving those cannabinoids as well. What's that? You know, irritable bowel syndrome and like all these things, like all these kind of diseases like endometriosis and things like that. It's like when those cannabinoids
so to me it sounds like, what does it kind of just address the inflammation maybe?
Oh wait, there was an article that I was reading, I just need to remember it. No, so like in your gut you have receptors and the cannabinoids go there, and I can't remember the article. That really annoys me. Like there were some really good points.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
No, it's all good. Well, look, I mean, in terms of that, like, let's take for example, if we do one day legalize it.
Yeah.
Do you feel like, do you feel like there would be a massive uptake? Do you feel like, because I mean, that's what a lot of people are worried about with legalization, because it's kind of like, well, okay, all you weed smokers, if you want to smoke illegally, and at least it puts off the people that weren't going to. Do you think there'll be a massive uptake that it becomes legal? Like, will not like non-smokers or whatever like suddenly decide that they want to give it a go, or how do you feel?
I think that maybe initially people would be like, oh well, it's okay.
It's a new thing. I mean, it's kind of like, there's a new kind of takeaway food. I want to try it, but
but also that depends on our education. Like, as I said, when I was 10, they told me, you don't smoke or you will die. And it's like, we just, you need to have a bit more of a conversation with children and with youth, that so that they are more knowledgeable about it, and they sort of, and you like tell them about risks and what the effects are.
It's funny you say that, because I mean, like, while you're saying all this, we have alcohol.
Yeah.
Where's all that?
Yeah.
I mean, we get that whole, like, don't drink and drive, don't drink and this and this and that, don't abuse alcohol. But reality is nobody cares.
Yeah.
And some of the worst things that happen in New Zealand are often fueled by alcohol. It's like all sorts of crimes, assaults, etc. But that's something I can go to the corner shop, and there's a lot of them out there. I can go to to most supermarkets, in fact, to get that. Like, imagine I could go to the supermarket to buy weed. How weird would that be? But
that would be pretty weird. But
But
like, obviously, if things were to be recreationally legalized, we need to have structures for education, as well as be mindful and sort of just, logical about where we're putting these shops. Like, are we going to put them outside schools, like right opposite the road? No, there's regulations around where alcohol stores can be in relation to schools and things like that. And obviously the age limits and restrictions around that.
I mean, at the end of the day, all these things matter very little because, I was reading a newspaper article the other day about how we have like an epidemic apparently of teenagers addicted to vaping. Oh, wow. And that's technically right now that's illegal. You can't get a vape if you're not 18.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. It's that's like buying cigarettes. It's like buying alcohol. There's just it's kind of like common sense, but it's still a thing. And much like with alcohol too. I mean, like everybody at school drinks. I mean, you can close your eyes to it as much as you want. And pretend that we live in this perfect society where, you only start drinking on your 18th birthday. But reality is everybody has had the worst alcoholic experience probably prior to their legal drinking age.
Absolutely.
So like in that sense, it also kind of shows the somewhat redundancy of such regulations.
I know. And when you look at like the vaping and the regulations based on little to no studies before these were all flooded into the market, with like little regard for long-term health effects or anything, that is not. I don't think it's okay. Like, it's the same, but when you're dealing with cannabis, this has been around for 2,000 years, or longer.
I mean, and a considerable amount of research has gone into it, say, as opposed to vaping. Because vaping just kind of got rolled out. They said, at least it's not smoking. And everyone's like, okay, cool, that must be all right. And then suddenly, we're talking about popcorn lungs and whatnot, and it's just like, oops, we didn't realize this would happen.
You've got no idea, and I still believe that you're not probably going to see the real effects until you have that long-term data.
Yeah, until, a lot of these teenagers kind of grow up to be middle-aged people, and we're going to start seeing some, long-term health effects. But, that being said as well, I mean, like vapes aside and, like nicotine addiction, but, like if we, for example, compare, the effects of, of, say, alcohol versus weed, like... Just so that people know, just so that people that have never smoked weed and have no idea, although I feel like just about everyone already has, but, just so people know, it's kind of like the effects are so radically different. They kind of, they assume they're like, you smoke weed, you might go out and do some shit. But the thing is, you're not going to. No. This is what people don't realize. It's like, this isn't like alcohol. You're not going to go out in a town and suddenly decide to act like a bull and go start fighting everyone. Like, chances are you're probably not going to go to town in the first place. Like, this is not where you want to be. You want to chill. You want to relax. Like if you were stressed, you're going to de-stress. If you feel like, quite often, like if you feel violent, you're probably more likely to be less violent with that. And you can even see it in different areas of life as well. Like if we're looking at it from a, like health benefit type thing, it helps people with Tourette's. It helps, I mean, it helps people with, just general depression. It'll do you a lot better than going on a drinking bender, which is what kind of we have done for a very long time. Like what happens when you're depressed? Everyone just starts drinking. And this goes back to like multiple generations of, of dealing with such things, with, being that intoxicated. Of course, I can kind of understand that there's there is still a potential for certain level of dependency. But, that being said, that's no different to being dependent on anything else, including the simplest things such as, sugars in your food, like people that stress eat.
When it comes to dependency as well, it's more what I think is your endocannabinoid system is actually just has adjusted as its homeostasis to receive that intake of cannabinoids regularly. So all it is that your systems have sort of adjusted to knowing that this is going to come in all the time. And I think the and also there's that psychological dependency, like
which
I need to get high.
That there is kind of what I'm aiming at, especially, because like, okay, like all, like the biochemical interactions aside, like let's look at the psychology of it, because we got people becoming alcoholics, not like, obviously there's the more your area kind of factors, like the the biological factors where people are predisposed to it. But like, from a psychological, let's just put, let's put it into that area, like arena, because this is something that we seem to be a bit more in touch with these days. But so for example, the effects of alcohol, people go on these benders, people become alcoholics because of stresses in their life, and people become addicted to drugs because of that,
Not
things
just
like
that, it's because you want to feel good, or you don't want to feel a certain way.
And the stresses of modern life, really add to it.
When you have an escape, or when you have something to deter you from that, of course, that's going to be appealing.
Yeah, so I mean, that's like, obviously that becomes a problem, and I mean, like, hypothetical scenario, and I know that multiple people have had such scenarios, but people that suffer with maybe insomnia, or having trouble sleeping, they start kind of smoking to get to sleep, then you sleep, you have a great sleep, but then you also find that, like, okay, I need to do this again and again and again, because otherwise I'm not going to have a good sleep. And ultimately it actually starts affecting your sleep. You start having a worse sleep.
Well, I haven't come across it.
Well, yeah, like, I mean, I think it depends on just how dependent you become on that. You kind of start tripping out in your sleep.
What I look at is like, there's a lot of stuff on the withdrawal or whatever. So, but with cannabis, the withdrawal is just that. It's like, lack of appetite. Your sleep is affected, and you're probably more irritable. But you're not having these sweats. Like, these are for long-term stoners as well. Like, you're not having these massive sweats, these massive, like, like, if you have the mindset that you don't want to smoke anymore, yes, it's going to be challenging the first week or whatever, but there's such a difference between, like, what I would call withdrawing from an addiction to withdrawing from cannabis. Like, like, it's not. Do you think it's
not the same as, like, say, for example, you kind of get to the, because I mean, I suppose when we talk about addiction as well, it's not just about, like, getting used to doing something, because like, exercise could be an addiction if we classify it that way. Somebody just gets used to the routine. But, in the context of addiction, more often than not, we talk about the, the negative side of it, where you become so dependent on it that without it, you can't function. And ultimately, even with it, your function becomes, there's some detrimental effects on it. So in terms of that, right? So, for example, if you started off with not being able to sleep, you started smoking to get to sleep, you do it more and more and more, but you also started noticing that when you are awake, you're also kind of, in this altered, unnatural state, right? But at the same time, you kind of, at that point, have a bit of a predicament where it's kind of like, well, I can't sleep without it, but also I'm kind of, messy when I'm not sleeping. So, like, this is another factor to it. So
and like, there's multiple things that we could talk about here, because the first one is, like, your willpower. Obviously, like, your willpower of whether or not you were committed to being off cannabis or not is huge. Like, that's the only thing that's kind of stopping you, because the withdrawal symptoms are not impossible to get by.
Well, like, let's assume that willpower these days is in short supply because of the society we live in. It's like, it's easy to kind of assume that a lot of us need to be strong, are going to be strong, but reality is a bit different to that.
Well, I mean, like, if you are doing it for sleep, right, and it's not going to be the THC that actually does it for you. It's going to be like a collaboration of the other cannabinoids that are not, like, actually psychotropic. So then we're looking at, like, extracting, there's different cannabinoids, they have different effects, and so if we were to extract those and to have only those oils and to have these specific.
Well, see, that's what I was aiming at. It's just like, so like if we go through this whole process, so rather than somebody smoking weed, getting high and then sleeping, you could just go straight to sleep.
Yeah.
And, chances are they're not going to feel any kind of way, like, because it's not so psychoactive. It's more like a physiological reaction.
And what I've noticed is, like, now you're starting to see these hemp extracts and stuff on the market and stuff, and so these are usually cold pressed, which means that the sort of the forms are in the acidic form because they haven't been decarboxylated, and so they're not in there. So CBDA, instead of having CBD, you'd have CBDA. And so it seems like the only real cannabinoid that society has a problem with is THC.
It is. It definitely is. But at the same time, that is that's the part that a lot of people want.
Yes, but when it comes to treating these different ailments and stuff, like, you do not need the THC half the time. Like, the THC is needed for pain relief, and because it is like a major sort of I can't remember. So it's like anti-pain.
Anti-inflammatory.
No. So like a lot of cannabinoids are anti-inflammatory or have anti-inflammatory properties, but with THC, it's the one that can like go past the brain barrier, and it gets into your brain, and it has that psychotropic effect. But with the other cannabinoids, they have effects. There are some that are pain relievers, but if you look at CBD and CBG and some of these other ones, they're actually good for like your nerve pain. So that's why they're given to MS patients, and so that they affect more of like the CB2 pathway. I mean the CB1 as well, and like CBD can modulate the effects of THC. And like THC does affect other regions of your body, but there's many different ways that you could get past this feeling of like this altered reality. Well, by just being clever.
Let's look at it this way, right? Let's look at it a more like Joe Roganish kind of way, like let's look at it from the point of view of people that are into exploring certain psychoactive properties of these things. Do you think that it's something that's risky? Like, is it something that would be dangerous potentially? Like, no. Is there an argument for that?
Yeah, as I said, that like the main one is the schizophrenia.
Yeah.
I've also come across one hypomyesis case, which is where if you ingest cannabis, like if you do it too much, some people have this reaction where they'll throw up like a lot, and it's this reaction. I've only seen it one time, but she was a major stoner, and then she had to stop, and because when she tried, she would keep on throwing up at a certain point, and like it just felt real sick, got real ill, and it's something that isn't common, but it can happen.
Okay, so but in terms of like for example, from a maybe a psychological point of view, is there something that could you get addicted to? Constantly going into this like altered realm, so to speak.
Can, like, especially because it feels good. Well, like apart from you obviously there's the paranoia that people can feel, but if it feels good, it's always that appeals to people.
And I think like from my point of view, if you take it into account, like why people are so addicted to the feel good things, whatever they are. I mean, I think this is where you can start kind of looking at the social implications of why people are going this way. Why is everything like, let's just put it in simple terms. Why is everything so shit that everybody's always looking to escape it?
Well,
true. And I think like if we kind of going to go down this rabbit hole, so to speak, I think that in that sense, if it's quite confronting for the system in that sense, because it's kind of like, well, look, you're running a system where people don't like it so much that they're abusing a lot of substances, which is why everything happens. I mean, like, even if we just take weed aside and we put, you know, drugs in general, including the real, like, destroyers of the world, like meth, heroin, etc., you know, the reason why people are doing it is because they're trying to escape from that reality. You know, so, like, I think that in that sense, a lot of the, you know, a lot of the powers that be kind of find it confronting that you could have something that's, you know, like, especially if you legalize it, that's going to be like, okay, well, you know, why is everything you do suck so bad that I can only live through it in this altered state? I think that as well is, you know, somewhat confronting to the system, so to speak.
Yeah, absolutely, because if people really started to question, you know, why do I have to feel like I escape? And, like, what am I escaping from? Oh, this 9-to-5 job that has no significance to my life other than providing me with the ability to live through monetary means. Like, you know, you're going down a huge rabbit hole of societal conditioning and, like... and,
you know, and this, like, the psychological factor of one's existence in that society. So... And,
like, that's a huge rabbit hole, and one I would gladly discuss, but it's
no, we're gonna do another episode on that. We definitely gonna need to do another episode on that.
But no, so, because, like, I even think, why do people take ecstasy on the weekends? Oh, because it makes them more sociable with people. Why are we not being able to be sociable with people?
Oh, I mean, even if we, like, let's take it one step down. I mean, we don't need to go to ecstasy. Let's go for Friday drinks. Which is, you know, which is not something that's illegal and just for, like, a select few. It's a culture. It's a working culture where, like, a lot of the, you know, especially corporate environments, well, not even that, like, you know, whether you're in trades, whatever, everybody has Friday drinks, you know, like, our week's been so shit, let's, you know, down something that's going to make us escape that.
I also think it's crazy that people think they're going to find, like, the love of their life on the weekend, you know, at the bar at, like, 3 a.m., you know, or, like, people, that's where people think that they're going to get that fulfillment, you know?
I don't know. I feel like, you know, we're at a point where in our life where that kind of thing has just gone so crazy, we don't even know where to look for that anymore. It used to be, you know, it used to be like, you know, let's go clubbing, but now it's like, well, then there's Tinder, then there's other stuff. The whole, you know, like, again, that's its own topic. The whole concept has become so,
but
you know, mutated.
The one little cool thing that I will mention about Friday drinks, more specifically beer, is that cannabis and beer are related, you know, like, so they're cousins, like, from a taxonomic point of view, like, they diverged about 3.2 million years ago from a common ancestor, a plant, which is so cool. And so this is one of the reasons why, you know, beer just has that feeling like the relaxant and stuff. It actually contains some of the same compounds that are in cannabis. So when I say beer, sorry, I mean hops, you know?
So hops,
so hops and cannabis are related, sorry. And so, like, within hops you have these not cannabinoids, but you have the terpenes, and one of them is beta-myricene, which is a known sedative, and beta-caryophyllene, a CB2 agonist. So CB2 is the cannabinoid receptor 2. So one of these compounds in beer interacts with your cannabinoid receptors. The same with beta-myricene. In some studies, it works synergistically with cannabinoids as pain management. So, and also within hops, you've got all the range of terpenes as well. So you've got linalool and limonene, and so all these different mono and sesquiterpenes which have all these benefits for it, and so for me.
So you're trying to say beer is good?
Well, I'm trying to say that. Well, you know, even if it wasn't beer, even if it was a hops infused kind of beverage, non-alcoholic one, then.
Zero alcohol beer.
Yeah, a zero alcohol hoppy thing. It's not gonna have the alcoholic element to it, but I would say that it would have some of the relaxant qualities.
Could you make a weed drink?
I haven't made a weed drink. No.
I mean, I'm not saying you, you know, particularly, you know, like that. But you know, like, could that be a thing? Could you make like a beverage based kind of.
Yeah, so I know that I think Coca-Cola is coming out with.
And Coca-Cola, you gotta love these guys. It started off with cocaine and Coke, and like maybe we'll make some, green thumb.
So there's a few like limitations on when it comes to drinks, is that cannabinoids are hydrophobic or lipophilic, which means they like fats. So you're gonna need to find a way to make them be carried within the drink. So I don't know how they're doing it with
kind
Coke.
Well, I suppose you kind of have to have a fatty drink, which is kind of weird.
I don't know.
Make a dip.
Yeah, I haven't really experimented or thought too much about this. But no.
There you go. It's good. This could be like a groundbreaking product idea.
I know, because you can see that vitamin C drink or whatever. It looks pretty cloudy, like it's in like Faro and stuff, and that's because vitamin C. You also need a vesicle to transport it for it to be bioavailable to you. And so there's those kinds of limiting factors when it comes to a cannabis drink. But that's why when you make edibles and stuff, you do it in oil. It's because fat is a carrier, carries a cannabinoid.
Well, it makes sense. So I suppose it has to be a product that can actually contain fat in it, which not a lot of drinks do. It's just like a fatty drink sounds like it wouldn't taste too good.
Or some sort of nanolipid thing, like a nanolipid which would house it. Do you know what I mean? So
but then you're really getting into modifying things to a
we
deeper
love doing
level.
That
Well, I suppose there's always options for it. Well, all in all, I feel like there's definitely ways to kind of just progress with it. I do feel like we've dropped the ball a little bit on the whole referendum.
Oh, absolutely.
I really do hope that at some point they kind of reconsider this. They said that there's no near future plans to revisit that, but I really hope they do, especially at a time like this. They really should have done it because especially with all the lockdowns, I feel like they could have made a lot of money. They could have made a lot of money, and it could have just made people's lives a bit easier. But
not just that, but you've got 2,000 years of data or experience with no one dying or anything. Like there's no overdoses that have been pinpointed to cannabis use ever. And yet, you've been asked to take something which has only been in circulation for a very short time. Right. I'm not going to get into it, but
I understand what you mean. Yeah.
And so, so I think that the logic around this is it's staggering to me. But I understand from an economic point of view with your medicinal cannabis, and also with your underground kingpins who don't really want to give it up, as well as your boomers who are not keen.
I suppose it's one of those things where it really if for the sake of progress, it really shouldn't have been that kind of set up. It shouldn't have come to a referendum. It should have just been okay, this is going down. Don't want it. If you don't like it, if you don't want it, just stay away from it. Nobody's forcing this on you.
Let's actually educate children around drugs, because we can't just say they don't exist, which I feel like has been the sort of the way that I was brought up anyway. It's these things are outside the law. No. But of course, when you tell a kid no, what are they going to want to do?
And I mean, at the end of the day, you can try as much as you want to kind of live in this, in your own little world that contains certain things and not others. Ultimately, I feel like you probably are going to confront those things, and it's going to be even more of a shock to you. It's going to affect you in the worst way. If you know what you're dealing with, you're going to you're going to handle it a lot better than somebody that's just never had anything, never tried anything, and then it's this big traumatic experience that,
Well, I mean, not just that, so we live in New Zealand where apparently there's a 2 degrees of separation, not 6. So we're all very tightly close-knit. And so say even if you were a high-achieving scholar, never touched a drop of anything or whatever, but then you're going to Otago and you're going to study medicine in Otago, what's the first thing you're going to discover down there? you're going to have an introduction to not just from this, but like on the TV, there's all these movies are sort of glamorizing cannabis.
Well, that's right. And I mean, music, everything, you know, like there's, it's just, it literally is everywhere around you. So it's not, you know, it's no longer just alcohol. It's not, you know, it's not like, it's devices that are legal, you know, like
and
there's.
As you were saying as well, like the way it's grown is really important. And so, and to know where it's grown, to know how it's grown, that will be the next step for us, like just in terms of health, because like where most people who are buying it don't know where it's from, don't know what they've sprayed it with, don't know how it's grown, don't know how it's dried, don't know what it's treated with or anything, and they're just inhaling this product.
And I mean, like in terms of that, I do feel like they kind of made the right step of legalizing, the whole testing drugs at festivals and stuff like that. I think it's a good thing that they've done it. I think it's a step in the right direction. However, it's not enough. It's not enough, and it kind of just shuts your eyes to certain obvious areas. There are certain there are big holes that you're ignoring with doing one thing and not the other. It's kind of like, we know there's a black market, we know where you got it from, and you got some illegal shit on you, but you show up to get it tested, and we also know that you're going to take it, you're going to consume it, so it's just like the whole thing is somewhat counterintuitive. It's kind of like, if you're going to go down this path, you might as well commit to it. And there's always going to be some sort of like social outrage to it. There's always going to be somebody that that's very Puritan on this kind of stuff. But then at the end of the day, look, there's a simple solution to these things. Change the channel. Don't take the drug. Don't do anything that you don't like, rather than going out of your way to like campaign for it, to kind of give yourself a bit of meaning.
You don't need to make criminals out of it. That's the other thing. Is like, we're spending resources on.
Yeah, we'll save that. We'll save that for the next one, because I really want to talk to you about like the the crime and society aspect of it. So I think we can wrap it up right about now. We've dropped a bit of good knowledge, but we're definitely going to have you back. I appreciate you doing this with me.
Thank you.
Thank you.